Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Hello, my friends. How are you this morning? Are you ready to go? Are you all powered up because of this extra couple hours of daylight savings time and more? It's just, oh, man, it's a day, right? I mean, we're still trying to figure it all out. I mean, you think it would have been great to get that extra hour of sleep, and I was still all messed up yesterday from I don't know. You know, the body knows. The body's like, what are you doing? Why are you still trying to sleep? It's another beautiful day here in paradise, and we are ready to go on this lovely Monday morning. We hope that you are all ready to dive into it here as we get into the month of November. How did we get into November so quickly? That is the ultimate question, right? Today's program, we've got some headlines from around the state, including some discussions on the closures of schools, well, around the state. But predominantly, we're seeing that there's a lot of fervor and falderall going on over the closures of schools in Anchorage. But this is a topic that many school districts are going to be taking up here over the next year or two, as we see more and more of these student enrollment numbers continue to drop. And there just seems to be a disconnect. There seems to be a disconnect between the citizens, the parents, and the reality of what's actually going on. And quite honestly, even amongst many of the school board members who, again, seem to think that this is only a problem that if they just pour more money into it, we could immediately solve it and we could stop fighting over this. Again, not understanding the pragmatic effects of what is really going on with the finances of the state and everything else. So we're going to discuss that this morning. We also are going to get a chance to chat with State Senator Robb Myers, who's going to be joining us here in hour 2, and we'll see what he has to say about the state of the state and where we're going and everything else. It's been it's been a heck of a year, and I don't imagine that this session is going to be getting any easier. Let's just put it that way. And so we're going to dive into some of that as well. Also, there is an interesting article in Must Read Alaska. It's an opinion piece by Michael Tabellario talking about, well, I mean, I feel like I should examine this article simply because it says exactly what we've been saying about the permanent fund dividend for the last couple 3 years, and somebody finally articulated it in a well thought out manner, and that is essentially that the PFD, the end run around the PFD politicians have now transformed the PFD into a hidden tax. And I know that we just caused Randy in Fairbanks to start frothing at the mouth because he just doesn't believe that that's possible. But it is a tax by any other name. And so it's it's a pretty significant jump. In fact, what was the headline that I just saw? There was a headline that I just saw. It wasn't a headline. It was a message that I got from Brad, who has spent all weekend going through some of the tax data from around the state. And this is something that I'm sure we'll dive into tomorrow with Brad. But as he was going through some of the tax data from the state of Alaska, which he says, I know I'm fun at parties. He says there's something that just kind of became apparent. He said, using PFD cuts, Alaska takes more as a share of income from its middle and lower income families than California takes under its income tax from billionaires. Just put that in perspective for a minute. Just put that in perspective for just a moment when we think about how, California and the taxation, and they take more, Alaska takes more in the form of PFD cuts and everything else from middle and lower income Alaskans than California takes from billionaires on its tax rolls. I mean, it's, man, just shocking when you look at the numbers like that. And Brad has been, he's been deep diving into these tax numbers here for the last 10 days or so. And I get little blurbs from him every now and then on some of the things that he's finding. And it's going to be shocking. Tomorrow's show ought to be a little bit eye-opening. That's for sure. All right. What else do I got here around the state? I hope that I don't know how many of you got a chance to go out this weekend. If you lived in the Anchorage area, for a chance to see the Shriners Classic football game there at the Dome. That's an all-star football game where all the best from the state, around the state, come down there and play an exhibition game in support of the Shriners kids to help fund the Shriners Hospital for Children, the travel fund for kids. But it was it was an amazing game. It was an amazing game, and we broadcast it for them live on their Facebook page, and it was a great time to be had by all, and a great opportunity there. So if you didn't have a chance to go watch it, and you are a fan of football or high school football to see some of the great talent that we have here, you should go out there to their Facebook page at facebook.com/Alaska Shriners. There we go. And you should be able to find it there and watch that game in its entirety. It was a fun time as well. That was the majority of my weekend. And now we're back and ready to go and rock and roll. And we're going to be pushing for the rest of this week. All right, let's get into some of the stories from around the state. We are going to dive into this school closure thing, which is, I just don't think people understand kind of what's going on. I don't think people have gotten a grip yet on what's going on with the budget in the state of Alaska. Because if they truly understood it, they wouldn't keep coming back for the same answers, which is, we should just spend more on our education. That seems to be the solution. The solution that everybody keeps coming up with. Well, we don't want to close anything. We don't want to lose anything. We don't want to feel any pain. We don't want to close our schools. We don't want Johnny not to know. And again, I've said this a million times, but let me just reiterate it. I remember that I had to change from one school to another when I was growing up. I think I attended the first, I think it was second grade. We went to second grade. I went to Joy School. That was when Joy was an actual school and not a community center. And then we switched over to Barnett in downtown. And, I don't remember it being some big, traumatic, hairy deal. And you'd think that the parents would want, just the best education that they could. And it really wouldn't matter where you go as long as the education is good. Now, that's a whole nother topic and highly questionable. But, a lot of the allegations and a lot of the reactions have been, Johnny just can't take this. Johnny just is going to be so traumatized by having to move from Susie's going to be so traumatized by having to go from one school to the other in the 3rd or the 4th grade. And I'm just thinking, I think we call that projection or transference. I think you're the one that's having that. I don't think Johnny's going to care in the long run. Johnny may not even remember the change, but that's part and parcel of what we're going to be dealing with. But I did want to touch on this question. Remember where I was talking about, all the things that have been happening in Anchorage lately, the rash of violent crimes, they had 3 murders in 10 days. I mean, it's just, kind of like, whoa, what's going on around there? And now we've got things like this happening in other parts of the state. The troopers are looking for a person of interest. This was over the weekend, not this weekend, but last weekend, and they finally have got some information on it. They're looking for a 18-year-old North Pole man who they say was involved in a violent crime. Darius Morgan was seen in Fairbanks last weekend, the weekend before last, I guess. He has been named in arrest warrants. He was connected in a shooting that left another teenager dead. According to the warrant, he was seen by multiple people at a college party carrying a black handgun. Now, he's not supposed to have had any. First of all, he's 18 years old. Okay, so I mean there's that. But this is what kills me. He was not supposed to have any firearms due to being a convicted felon from a 2024 robbery charge. He's being charged with a 3rd-degree misconduct involving weapons. Troopers arrived at a party after there were multiple calls regarding gunshots, and when they arrived, they found a minor lying outside under a deck with an apparent gunshot wound to the head. They said they found pistol magazines and shell casings as well. Now, they don't say that Morgan is a suspect in the shooting. They're looking for him because he's a felon in possession of a handgun. But 2 and 2 usually equal 4 is the first. So they're looking for this guy, Darius Morgan, 18 years old. And then it just keeps going. This last Friday, they now arrested a Fairbanks woman accused of helping another man who was wanted in connection of a violent kidnapping and torture case. Nicole Karsten was taken into custody on Friday for hindering prosecution, according to KTUU, after allegedly assisting Jonathan Critchfield, who still remains at large, has a $200,000 warrant. They said additional charges are being forwarded. Critchfield is wanted on charges of kidnapping, assault, and torture after he and 41-year-old Edwin Hansen attacked a victim in a disturbing hour-long ordeal in North Pole last week. According to the documents, Critchfield and Hansen gave the victim a ride, apparently somewhere, before accusing them of stealing property. The victim then told investigators the men drove them to a residence where they allegedly threatened, beat him, and shot him in the leg with a sniper rifle during a so-called truth or dare game, and sniper rifles in quotes. So, I mean, some kind of hunting rifle. The victims say the documents say Hansen also pistol whipped the victim and forced them to clean up their own blood. The victim then escaped and was treated at Fairbanks Memorial. Hansen was arrested soon after, and they're still looking for Critchfield. His bail is set at apparently $500,000. But they got this other woman too. I mean, what's going on at Fairbanks? I mean, really, what? Is it something in the water? Or is this more indication of the bluing of the interior? I know causation, and there's look, I know I'm stretching there, but as I start to look at it and go, man, that's not a story that I would expect to hear out of the interior. That seems a little weird. But reason number 364 to go armed. So I'm just saying you may want to think about that as we go through. All right, let's continue on here. We've got more coming up, including this discussion of the school closures. This is a conversation that's going to be repeated around the state. I can guarantee it. We'll see what happens. All right, we got to go. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Back with more after this.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes on Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay. Wow. Hi guys. How are you guys doing? Are you all ready? Sorry, I'm making a move here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3:30. Sorry, I'm over here making mud pies. I'm over here making mud pies, trying to figure out if I got the right number of things in there. Okay, I did. I got it. This is something that I normally take care of before the show, but this morning I did not. So apologies. Let me go back over here. The house where the teenager shooting happened was an Airbnb that was rented for the party of underage people so their kid could have a party. The parents rented an Airbnb so the kids could have a party. Really? All right, I'm scrolling backwards here. Good morning. Theft by deception. Fat Ray says that's a pretty bold claim by Brad. Brad's comment to me on the taxation thing in California. Hopefully he's going to show his work tomorrow. I'm sure he is. Yes, I'm sure it's going to be. Tomorrow is going to be an eye-opening show. Let's see. We'll see what's going on. Let's see. No school board, assembly, municipal, city, village, tribe, corporation, and nonprofits care about the fiscal issues the state is in. That being said, the legislatures don't have any concept about state finances either. Kim says Tuesday, the doom and gloom day to beat all doom and doom days. Can't wait. All right, guys, we got to stop telling Brad that he's the doom meister. Okay, I mean, we gotta give the guy a break. I mean, he's just trying to lay the truth out there, and we shouldn't keep giving him a hard time about it. But Kevin's dropping some Substack links to some of his writing on the PFD. There's some good stuff in there. So the best part of this week, says Chris, I got an extra hour's sleep. Yeehaw. Snap loss would not have been an issue if we had gotten the full PFD less than a month ago, said Kevin. He's 100% right. You imagine the average family of 3 or 4, and they ended up getting, their $3,700 PFD. Do you think they'd have a real problem with SNAP benefits today? Being without for 1 month, they couldn't buy their own food this year or this month. Chris says it's Anchorage people moving to Fairbanks that's causing the problems in Fairbanks. I don't know, man. I just start reading and I'm like, what is going on? Let's see. Close school, give us more money. Getting ready was doing good till I moved physically. Says Rick, I'll be better about noon. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Renee finally made it over to Facebook. Good morning, Renee. I'm sorry, I'm just going here. Temperature always drops a few degrees when Brad enters the chat. Oh, man. All right, let's get to it. Here we go. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like and share, subscribe, ring the bell. Let's enjoy this conversation. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
Okay. Everybody's still waking up this morning. I don't know how daylight savings. Usually it's the springing ahead that messes you up. This was a weird one. The fall back, and we still a little punchy this morning. People still a little bit complaining about what's going on out there. All right. Well, Anchorage School District is held a couple public meetings about the closure of 2 more elementary schools. They have closed a total of 5 schools in the last during the last 10-year period. Well, 15-year period, I guess. 15-year period. But at that same time, this is from 2010 to 2025, they have lost over 7,500 students. 7,500 students. Now, I don't know what the average school holds these days, but I remember when I was on the Borough Assembly in Fairbanks that the vast majority of schools, especially the elementary schools, etc., they only held about 500 students, right? For the average elementary school or whatever. So 5 schools times 500 is only 2,500 students. And even if it was 1,000 kids, a school, that's only 5,000 students that are accounted for out of the 7,500. So they've got a lot of these schools that are stretched actually pretty thin. But this is what always happens when we hear what's going on and we see the parents react to the idea that somehow their school and their local communities could potentially be closed, right? There's an uproar. And of course the parents are upset about they don't want to lose their community schools. And in some cases, as I said, they'll throw things out there like, well, but little Johnny or little Susie, they love the school. They love where they're at. And they'll be harmed by having to go to another school. Which many times I think, again, is a little bit of projection where the parents don't want to have to take the extra effort to move the kids to another school or do something different or shake up their routine in any way, so to speak. So they held these meetings. They held a couple different meetings. And at the latest one, they've taken a look at how these schools are being used and what the percentage of, how full is it, et cetera, et cetera. Deputy Chief of Schools Kirsten Johnson Strumpler said that underutilized schools are more susceptible to issues like when one teacher has to call out sick, and closing schools will reduce the number of mixed grade classrooms throughout the district. Apparently, they're mixing the grades together in many of the classrooms. She said, we're looking at low utilization rates. The reason we're here, unfortunately, is partially budget related, but partially enrollment decline. Well, those two things go hand in hand. We've talked about this. When you build your entire business model, and it is a business, don't get it twisted anyway, but when you build your entire financial, if you don't want to get too, your financial model is based on bodies and enrollment. The reason we're here, unfortunately, is partially budget related, but partially enrollment decline. Those two things they're together. They're welded at the hip. She says, we as a district really do have to consider what our utilization rate is with how many students are in each building and how we're using our money as a district most effectively. And of course, the parents come out and they question the whether or not we don't want it to be done. We don't want it to be closed. It's going to be tough. And then you get some of the board members that come in and just apparently have no concept of what's going on outside of their bubble, apparently at the state level or anything else. She said, in regards to a question she said some of the people who had come and asked her, this is Kelly Lessons, said several parents had asked if school closures would increase class sizes at the schools receiving the students. She said that's a misconception. She says it's not correct for people to say that school consolidations are going to increase their class sizes. But then she goes on to say, what is true is that insufficient funds for supporting and maintaining public education are responsible for increased class. So again, it's not the fact that we have fewer students and that we have to consolidate them down. It's the fact that we're just not getting enough money. Insufficient funds for supporting and maintaining public education are responsible for. Are you kidding me? You have 7,500 students less than you did 10 years ago. And your whole business model is based around a per student funding formula. What do you think is going to happen? Do we have to increase the per student funding to match the missing 7,500 students? Is that what you're advocating for? When, by the way, we don't have any more money. The state is scrambling to try and fill the hole that it has before. But this, again, is the brain surgeon that is one of the school board members saying what's true is that the insufficient funds for supporting and maintaining public education are responsible. We didn't get enough money. Not that we lost 7,500 students, right? Now, interestingly enough, and people are saying, well, why do you have to close it? Why do you have to? Well, at a presentation from the school board finance committee a couple weeks ago, they laid it out and they estimated a savings to the district of about $900,000 for closing a school. So they're going to save almost $1 million for closing a school. And the ones that they're looking at are some of the lowest, I guess what they'd say, lowest capacity, lowest utilized, however you want to say it. Is currently the Lake Otis Elementary. It has 53%. It's 53% full. So it's just over half full. And 43% of the students who live within the Lake Otis boundary have transferred out and attend school somewhere else in the district. Now, I have questions. I have questions about that specific stat. If the school is only 53% full, but that you've also discovered that 43% of the students who live within the boundary of that school, who this is their official neighborhood school, but 43% have transferred out and attend school somewhere else, you should be asking yourself the question, why? why are they out? You know, and nobody seems to be answering that question. Or if they do, it's in a kind of Schadenfreude, oh, you're taking money for the damn homeschoolers are taking money from the regular brick and mortar or the charter schools nobody's asking the question, why? You've got a school that's half full. And you've got nearly half the students who live in the area who don't want to, who don't even want to be in the school. Are we asking the question? There's no self-analysis here. This is part of the problem. There's no self-analysis. Then the other school that they're talking about closing is Fire Lake, and it's currently at 48% capacity. Now, there was no numbers in the article about how many students in the district are not attending the school there, like there was on the other one. But 48, it's less than half full. So yeah. And this is a big problem throughout. I think David Boyle had given us a number at one point and said that there's only a couple of schools that are at like 80% capacity. Those are that's the highest capacity numbers across the district. So if you've got a bunch of schools that are half to 3/4 full, it's a tremendous duplication of effort of having, principals and everything else that you have to have. No wonder they're having a problem. And these parents, again, they just don't seem to grasp, well, we just need to keep these schools open. Well, this to me, again, shows the disconnect between what people are paying and the fact that the state is picking up a big part of this tab, and people, state money is free to these people. They may pay the local contribution or the local property taxes, but the rest of this stuff, and they're not looking to themselves. They're not looking to say, well, if you want to keep your school open, then we're going to have to raise your mill rate. Whoa. No. The state should be picking that up. The free money from the state. Again, with no concept, there's no connectivity between the private, the private economy and these people and what's going on with the state. The state is just the sugar daddy. They have no idea how it's funded. They have no idea where the money comes from. They just want more of the money, right? More. That's what they want. They want more of the money. Not realizing that there is no more blood in that stone. There is no more blood in that stone. And we've seen this time and time again. We saw it in Fairbanks when they were closing some of the schools there, where there was people on Facebook just screaming and wailing and gnashing of teeth, everything from how could you take little Johnny's school away? He loves it there and he'll be shattered, to those damn homeschoolers are stealing all the money from the public school system and they ought to all be forced in shackles back into the public schools. I mean, that's not exactly what they said. I'm making a point. And then all these people standing around going, oh, we need to keep these schools open even though they're only at 40% capacity. Look, guys, unless you're willing to pony up hundreds of thousands of dollars out of your own personal monies, there's really no way to do it. If you've got two schools, let's just say, for example, these two schools, 52% and 48% capacity. Between the two of them, they can make a full school. All right? That means that if you consolidated just these two buildings, now they're geographically separated, but we're using it as a hypothetical. If you combine these two buildings to where it was at 100% capacity, how many jobs would be eliminated from duplication of effort? From principals to secretaries to janitors to guidance counselors to, fill in the blank, librarians, all the way down. How much money could be saved? And how many people, are going to be laid off because of that. This is where the reticence is. The reticence on the parental side is the change is hard, and they have no idea how this is all paid for. And on the administration and the education side, they don't want their people to lose their jobs. So that's what we're fighting back against. But this is going to be repeated over and over. We saw it in Fairbanks. Again, with all the commentary on those school closures. We're going to see it in every community when they start talking about closures. Now, you can whine and complain about it, or you can do something else about it, which is what Nikolaevsk is doing down here on the Kenai. They tried to keep their school open, couldn't do it, so now they're applying to create their own charter school in that building. That's brilliant. Now, if only the school district will sign off on it, instead of just leaving the building empty and doing nothing with it. But this thing it's a never-ending cycle of pain, people. You've built an entire model on funding on a per-student basis, and when the student, and again, you could fix this if you understood why students are not attending your school. I mean, I want to go back to that number. Lake Otis, this is from the ADN. Lake Otis Elementary is currently among the lowest capacity schools in the district at 53%. And 43% of students who live within the Lake Otis boundary transfer out and attend schools elsewhere in the district. Why? Is anybody asking that question? And not just at Lake Otis, but anywhere in the state. Is anyone asking, why are these students leaving the public school and going, or the public school, maybe they're not. Maybe they've left Lake Otis and they're going to another school in the district, because that's allowed, right? You could go to another school in the district. You just, you have to provide the transportation to it. Maybe that's what it is. Or maybe they've gone homeschooling, or maybe they're going to charter school, or maybe they're going to private school. You don't know. You have no concept of why it's happening. You just know it is. And your answer is, well, we need more money for the rest of the students to keep it up. Instead of looking at and analyzing it and realizing that there is a bit of competition here, there is a bit of the free market working here, and you have to understand, you have to do a little market research to understand why things are going the way that they are going. But nobody wants to do that. I don't understand it. I really, really don't. All right, we got to go. Running a bit late here. The Michael Dukes Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We return with more in just a moment. We'll be back right after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes,
allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay. Sorry, I got on a rant there and I wasn't reading your guys' comments. So let me go back over here to see what you're saying here. Okay. All right. Anchorage Elementary Schools, according to what David Boyle says, he says the average Anchorage Elementary Schools holds from between 175 and 450 students. So they've lost 7,500 students, and they've only closed 5 schools. So at a maximum, That would account for 2,500 student spaces. There's still 5,000 empty student spaces in the school. Parents whose school are now being closed usually have no clue how well or poorly their schools are performing on the AK Star. Yeah. Good morning. While the ASD is closing some schools, it is building a new Inlet View school. But before the bond passed for this school, there were 235 students. Now, miraculously, there's only 175 students. Let's see. The parents that are complaining about closing schools are from the generation of entitlements and mob rules. Now, I mean, I think it's a mind shift. Again, they have to understand that this is how the whole thing is funded. Is on if you are concerned because the whole thing is funded on student participation, right? Based, and it's a head count for the number of students you get your money based on the number of butts in the seats. If you understood that, then you would think that the first thing that they would do is analyze why aren't these eligible students coming to our school? Why wouldn't you do that? The state funding formula, says Rob, pays more for 2 half-full schools instead of 1 full school. Well, you're going to have to explain that to us in the next hour, Rob. I want to know more about that. All right. How many of these schools have had their capacity adjusted? This is an insidious thing. Kevin is bringing up an insidious thing, which just makes me shake my head, because I saw this when we were at when I was on the assembly in Fairbanks. We'd start talking about these schools, and I remembered that at one point they were talking about a capacity of a school, and I was like, wait. I thought this school, when it was built just a handful of years ago, was supposed to have, and I don't remember which school, I just remember shaking my head because it was changing the rules, right? Because when they had built the school, they said it had a capacity of 400 students, I think was the number. And now they were saying, oh, no, the capacity of the school is only 330 students. And I'm like, wait a second. Oh, well, it's because they adjusted the capacity downward because they expanded the bubble that each student has around them. We think each student should have 3.5 square feet of, space, or, they adjust the bubble. We build a school for 500, but then we adjust it down to where the new max capacity is only 300. And so now we need another school to take care of the extra 200 kids, right? It's a game. It's a game where they're playing with the numbers to justify things like building new schools or changing things around. This is what they're talking about. How many of those schools have had their capacity adjusted since they were built? Asked Kevin. That's a valid question. Superintendent Brian said that no teacher staff will be let go. If the district is losing many students, how do we need the same number of teachers? Remember, 86% of the operating budget of ASD is personal benefits and salary. Yes, sir. That's a valid question. That's a valid question right there. Oh, man. Okay. Remember, that's even more interesting. The Anchorage School District uses its own capacity numbers, not the state's capacity numbers. So the capacity is even lower than the state's numbers. I mean, you can't figure it out. You can't win in that situation. The state also doesn't want to know why employees leave, said Brian. They can't handle the truth. Like I said, if you were analyzing it, what would you come up with? Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Okay. We're going to start with the last comment here that came in from Brian. And we were talking about why don't the schools ask, right? Why aren't the schools asking why these parents are leaving? Why these students are leaving? They don't want to know. They can't. I mean, he says the state doesn't want to know why the employees leave. They can't handle the truth. This is the same question that we're asking there. If you have employees leaving, right, that's a big crisis at the state level, employees leaving, and they think they know the answer, they're just going to put a new defined benefits thing in, but they don't ask. Why are students leaving the district? Nobody knows because nobody's asking. And like I was just saying, since you have since your entire fiscal model is built around the number of students that you have, just think of them as little revenue generators, right? If they start to leave, you'd think the first question you'd ask yourself is, why? Not can we get more from each of those remaining, but maybe we would stop the bleeding and ask why. But it seems like nobody is, nobody is really asking that question. David says the irony is parents complain emotionally, and that's what I was talking about in the Facebook pages, these meetings where they get up there, they hold their signs, and little Johnny and little Susie would be crushed if they had to leave their school and blah, blah, blah. The parents complain emotionally about closing the schools, yet they're not concerned when that school is not teaching their kids how to read. I mean, he also said parents whose schools are being closed usually have no clue how well or poorly their schools are performing on the AK STAR test. Again, it's not every parent, but a lot of them, it's true. It's these emotional arguments about how, we've always, and I understand change is hard. But change is inevitable also. And now would be the time to teach little Johnny and little Susie that change can happen, no matter how uncomfortable it gets, especially if it's for the greater good of saving the system overall or making it more efficient or doing better. Or do we want to teach little Johnny and Susie that if they just throw an emotional tantrum, they'll always get their way? I've been talking about why don't we consolidate these schools, and Rob, who is going to be with us here in a few minutes, Robb Myers is going to be joining us in a few minutes. He said, and he's going to have to explain this to us, the state funding formula pays more for 2 half-full schools than it does for 1 full school. So we're rewarding inefficiency, is what you're saying. Rewarding inefficiency. And then David, our education advocate, who's been following this stuff very closely. I'm quoting a lot of David this morning because he's been throwing some numbers out there. He said Superintendent Bryant has said that no teaching staff will be let go. If the district is losing many students, 7,500 students since 2010, why do we need the same number of teachers if we're losing that many students? He says, remember, 86% of the operating budget at the school district is made up of personnel, salaries, and benefits. So if you've lost 7,500 students, now, granted, they probably put some downward pressure on it over the last dozen years. But if you do close a school, remember what I was just saying, if you close one school, that's one less principal, one less vice principal, one less office lady, her helpers, one less librarian, one less guidance counselor, one less janitor, right? I mean, it's all these things, but not a single person is, not a single teaching staff is going to be let go. If you consolidate those schools down, now maybe you've got empty classrooms and you could shuffle a lot of those teachers over. That's great. But you're saying that not one single one is going to be, is going to be what? What? How do you even wrap your brain around that? It's, what? I just see somebody says the Education Task Force wants to end the Read by 9 program. I just saw that in the chat room. Somebody's just saying that. I need a source on that. Somebody want to drop me a link or DM me a link to that, because if that's the case, oh man. I mean, this thing took 6 years to pass, and it's showing some promise in its second year now, and scores are going up, and now they want to end it? If that's true, we've got much deeper problems here than what's going on. Yeah, there was a village, Chris just reminded me, there was a village that asked parents to move to their village with their kids, and they would get free housing so they could get free. That was so they could keep their school open. That was down on Kodiak. And I don't remember the name of the town, but it was a little tiny community that needed 10 students for their school to remain open. And I don't think they made it. They were offering to move people out there, put them up for a year, free housing, everything else. Yeah. I mean, again, money's one hell of a drug, folks. We've become a dependency state. Yes, we have. 100%. 100%. Absolutely. Yeah, there's just, and then Kevin made a valid comment, Kevin McCabe, when we were talking about the size of these schools and everything else, because David also made the point of saying Anchorage elementary schools hold their capacity is about 175 to 450 students. So when I was using the number of 500, that's a pretty high, gracious number. But then Kevin asked, how many of those schools have had their capacity, quote unquote, adjusted since they were built, which is a whole nother thing. They build a school that initially had a capacity of 500, and then later on they adjust it down. Oh, now it can only hold 300. Why? Did it get smaller? No, we've just decided to, adjust it. All right, we got to go. Robb Myers is our guest, The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. We'll be back with more. He's coming in just a moment. Yeah, car luck. I think it was car luck. That was it right there. All right. Yes. Yes, we are. Sorry. Rob was asking me a question. Do you need the link still, Rob? I'm trying to remember here. It's the same link as before, in case you were wondering. I guess let me just copy the link for Rob. I don't want it to be confusing. It's a day, man. It's a day. All right. Yeah, I'm looking here. That was Hope? No, it wasn't Hope, Kathy. It was Car Luck, which is down on the Kodiak. It was down on Kodiak. And they were literally advertising for families to come on down and live there. Here we go. Thousands respond to Car Luck's viral ad for cost-free living. The two families moved into Carluck after its viral ad for an expense-free living went viral this summer for an ad offering a cost-free living in an effort to reopen their schools. It was Carluck. And then you see just a few months later, Carluck school to close after departures of families who were picked to. Yeah, this is back in 2023. And two families moved there, and then we're like, nope. They were there for just they were like, because they announced it in July, and then in October, they're like, nope. They closed the school. That's what happened. Because, man. Let's see. Remember when the ASD talks about reducing the number of personnel, it's reducing positions, not personnel. Yeah, we talk about that we talk about it in the state a lot, right? The funded but unfilled positions. What, how many of those things does the ASD have? How many does the ASD have? That's the question. How many funded but unfilled positions are they sitting on? Oh, that's right, Tawny. Thank you for reminding me. I'll remind everybody when we come back that today and tomorrow's voting day in the Matsu. So they're going to have to get their stuff done. Today's the last day to early vote. Tomorrow is the official election day. All right. Robb Myers, our guest. Hello.
Hola, senor.
Hola, senor. You ready to go here? You all ready to dive into this?
Oh, I'm a touch sleep deprived, but I'm okay. I got back from Prudhoe at midnight last night.
Oh, well, good. Hopefully you got that extra hour on the road. That was from your spring forward.
Yeah, I did, because I was I got stuck in Prudhoe for an extra about 8-9 hours compared to what I planned, because I had mechanical problems on the road and had to get them fixed in Prudhoe.
Oh man, what a big what a challenge, what a headache. I feel you. I was traveling all weekend, so I definitely feel your pain here on this one. All right, we're gonna be getting back to you here. Your audio's good. We'll return here to Robb Myers in just a second. Don't go anywhere. What was I was just looking at something here. What was the okay. I don't recall. This is what happens when you get to be elderly like me. You just can't remember. All right. Let's see. Going back here through the going back through the comments. We're going to talk about the Matsu. Ron says NEA is the biggest problem for our school systems. Get rid of NEA would be a great way to start. I mean, sure, in a perfect world, if I was God Emperor for a day, that'd be one of the first things that I would wish for. But we know that that's not realistic. So we're going to have to find a way to counter that. That's the problem. We're going to have to find a way to counter that. And that's what we need to be working on right now. Pelican School District has 11 students and a superintendent. I mean, is that it? Is that the only school in the whole district? Is it its own district overall? Is it just the one school? How much, because it's not just a superintendent. It's a superintendent, an assistant superintendent, and a procurement officer, and a so-and-so, and a HR. It's going to have a whole duplication of effort. Everybody's getting their bite at the apple in those things. All right. We got to go. We got to go. I'm sorry. Frank just hit me with the thing here. We're going to jump into this. Let me go. I'll read this while we're listening to this. Back with more. Here we go.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet. MichaelDukes.com, across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Hello, my friends. How are you doing for this beautiful Monday morning? We hope that you are rested and rejuvenated from the long weekend, and we hope you got some. We hope you got some extra sleep out there. Unlike our next guest, which is Robb Myers, he definitely didn't get some extra sleep this weekend. We're about to be joined by him, but a quick reminder: if you live in the Mat-Su, today is the final day to early vote, and tomorrow is officially voting day. And it's gonna be a fun time. We got to go out there and get your vote on, my friends. Get your vote on. We're going to be talking about that here tomorrow and the day after. We'll see what those elections look like, and then we're going to come back to it. But you gotta get into it. You got to get into it. So go out there and vote. If you haven't done it yet, do it today, early voting, or do it tomorrow. Tomorrow's the last official day that we can jump in there and talk about it. All right, let's get to it, shall we? Let's jump into it with our guest this morning, State Senator Robb Myers, who joins us to talk about. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, including the three-legged stool of politics. The three-legged stool of Alaska, the economy. Sorry, not politics. Although I'm sure that has a big portion of it. Good morning, Robb. How are you doing this morning, my friend? What's going on?
Oh, we're doing okay. As I said in the break, I got home about midnight last night, coming back from the slope. So still a little bit in recovery mode, we're here.
A little bit low and slow. Before you jump into this discussion, which, by the way, you outlined in your monthly newsletter, which is called Roadside with Robb. And this is from back, was in August, September, you wrote this original piece. But before we get into that, or was it July? Okay. You made a comment in the chat room that I'd like you to expand on real quick. You said the state funding formula, because I was talking about funding formulas in schools, and you said that the state funding formula pays more for 2 half-full schools instead of 1 full school. Can you explain that to me real quick? Because that seems like that's incentivizing bad behavior. I mean, or I guess not bad behavior, but poor decision-making. Let me put it that way.
You are correct. That is what the incentive is. So there is just kind of to back up a little bit. I outlined this one in my June newsletter, by the way, if anybody wants to go back and look at it. So the state funding formula for schools, we start with the BSA. We all know that part. But then we forget that there are 7 different multipliers that get applied to it as well. And, the correspondence factor is one, and there's the factor for CTE and special education and a couple others. One of them that's in there that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, that burns my butt, is called the school size factor. Basically what it does is it says, all right, if this is how large the school is, and it breaks it down, not just by district, but by each individual school within a district. If this is the size of the school, then you multiply by this factor. And the break-even point, if I remember right, because I don't have the statute book in front of me, is somewhere around 500 or 600 students Below that, there's an increase multiplier. Above that, there's a decrease multiplier. You start counting it as, 0.95, 0.9 of a student. Whereas I think you can, when you go down, you can go up to, it's something like 1.6, 1.8 or something like that as you're going lower and making smaller schools. And so the effect of that is, it doesn't matter what your school capacity is. It matters how many kids are actually enrolled in that school. And again, that's enrolled, not who shows up. It's who's enrolled. So if you have two schools with 250 kids enrolled each, you will get paid more by the state than if you combine those into one school with 500 students, because it changes that school size multiplier. So you actually get paid more to operate less efficient schools. And you're right, that is a massively screwed up incentive. I've tried to change it on the Senate floor. They won't go for it. This is one more reason we need to open up that whole funding formula and mess around with some things. Now, they have tried to kind of blunt that a little bit. They actually passed a hold harmless, what was that, 2017 or so, which said, okay, if you're going to close a school, then and we change that school size factor, we're gonna stair step that down over the course of 4 years. So from the time you close it in year one, you still get 75% of what you would have got if you left that school open, and 50%, and then 25%, and then by year 4, now you're down to this is what your actual school size factor is.
Right. Right.
But yeah, that's what the incentive is in the school funding formula from the state. So if you keep partially full schools open, the state will pay you more. That's pretty messed up.
Yeah, no, that's frustrating again, because it incentivizes that poor decision making in all those, with all that stuff. That makes no sense whatsoever. All right. Well, I don't want to belabor that part. I want to dive into this discussion. Thank you for the explanation on that. You were talking about this during the summer, and you started talking about, we always talk about the three-legged stool in the state of Alaska, right? 3 big industries. But you break this down for us in this. And so I want to kind of give you the reins to set this up. But you start talking about the 3 big legs. The three legs are not what they think they are. You break it down into a little bit of a different flavor than what most people are expecting when you talk about the three-legged stool. So set this up for us, and let's talk about this.
So those of you that have been watching me for a while, whether you get my newsletter or watch me on Facebook, hear me on here or things like that. I talk a lot about the economy. I talk a lot of, and so I'm looking at what different sectors contribute towards the economy. And one thing I've talked to you a lot about is that if you look over the last 20 years, we've only seen growth in 2 sectors: oil and government. That's it. The rest of the economy, once you adjust inflation, is flat. Well, earlier this summer, I had a look at the economy. Instead of looking at it, instead of looking at the economy in terms of GDP, I wanted to look at it in terms of work in our economy.
We're breaking up here.
And we've talked a lot about how
Sorry, Rob. We got a little bit of an internet spike there or something. We lost you for a second there. So in terms of the economy, I'm sorry. Go back.
Am I back yet?
Yeah, you're back. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So one thing you and I have talked about a lot is that the Sorry, trying to get my internet connection to behave itself a little bit better.
Yeah, there you go. Go ahead.
One of the things that we've talked about a lot is how so much money from government spending makes its way to other industries and how certain industries are really connected to that government spend. And so I said, okay, if we're going to start breaking this down into what gets paid for by government, we should be honest about that. Even if my paycheck doesn't say I work for the government, is the money for my job coming from the government? And I thought, well, I've talked about oil and how important that is for the state, and let's do the same thing there as well. Okay, so let's take the transportation industry that's heavily dependent on oil and kind of lump that in with the oil sector. And then let's take some of these other sectors like healthcare and social services and education services and lump those in with government, because and construction, so much construction spending is government spending. So if you looked at just government direct jobs in this state, you're looking at about 21% of our workforce. We're actually second in the nation. We're just a hair behind Wyoming in that percentage. But once you lump in all of those other sectors, you're looking at government spending is providing jobs for approximately 45% of the workforce in this state. That's a scary spot. That's a scary place for us to be. Right. Because, and now this is federal, state, and local all together. But, when you just kind of take a rough estimate, throw in the industries that are heavily dependent on government spending, and, not everybody in those industries is, this year is going to have that job that comes from government spending, but there's also going to be some other industries that have a smaller portion I didn't include that, kind of makes up for it. So this 45%, it's kind of it's just an estimate, maybe the real number this year is 42, maybe it's 48, something like that. And, that's what I was trying to get a flavor of, is like, okay, how much of our employment is actually dependent on government spending? Then I took a look at the oil industry and I lumped in the transportation sector. Now, oil is about 20% of our state's GDP, give or take, depending on the year, but it's only about 4% of our state's employment. Throw in the transportation sector, that's around another 6%. And that's not only trucking or aviation. I'm a truck driver, I pay attention to this. That's also, Alyeska falls into the transportation sector as transporting oil through the pipeline. That's how the federal government tracks it. So you put all that together, oil and transportation together are only about 10% of our state's workforce. Then you got about 45% of the workforce is every other industry within the state, whether that's fishing, mining, agriculture, tourism, hospitality, the service sector of restaurants or auto mechanics, the whole 9 yards, everybody else. That's 45%. But remember, that 45% is basically staying flat. We have, as I said, outside of oil and government, Alaska's economy has not grown since 2005. We're flat. And this is a scary place for us to be. And, I think that if we're going to fix the problem, the first thing we have to do is recognize how bad the problem is. And, there's a whole host of reasons as to why we're in this mess. But we've got to realize that, when we talk about government spending, it's not just that 21% of folks that are employed directly by government, but it's everybody else in that sector that's dependent on it, which means that all of those other businesses are lobbying government to continue to spend the money on them. Healthcare, GCI, construction, we could come up with some other things as well, but those are kind of the ones that always pop into my head. And that's what's driving a lot of our spending.
Right. Well, and that's exactly when you look at this number and you realize, and we did some math on this several years ago, and when we realized that the overall employment numbers across the state were approaching that 50% mark for all government employees, and then you add on some of the add-on industries, et cetera, we realized that they are the ones that are making, they're voting for their pocketbook. And if their pocketbook is funded by government, then obviously they're voting for more government. And that was when I sounded the alarm on this back in 2000 I don't know, 10 or something, we were talking about this. And then when I got on the assembly, we actually looked at some of the numbers, and it was very concerning. And it's only gotten larger since then.
Right. Because what has happened, well, as a percentage, it's gotten larger because, you go back to 2010 or so, and that's about when the oil sector was at its peak. And so as those other sectors are dropping, that means the percentage of government is going up. I don't have the numbers in front of me going back that far. We only looked at a couple of years here in my newsletter. But yeah, if your oil sector or other sectors are dropping, and of course, you got a lot of people leaving state during that time period, about the time you left Fairbanks is about the time that the exodus kind of started, with, after oil prices dropped, and, so that section of government jobs is just going to grow as a percentage from there. So, it's a scary place for us to be. And as you point out, that is a significant portion of why it is so hard to cut the budget, is because that everything that somebody like you or I would consider waste or abuse or not government's job or something like that, these folks are looking at it and going, well, that's my paycheck. I'm going to vote to protect my paycheck.
Right.
And when you've got that large of the voting block, now remember, that's 45% of the workforce. Now throw in their spouses, and then throw in the fact that, if a lot of people in the state don't vote, you might be talking about a majority of the voters in this state. So that's a scary place for us to be. And again, we got to recognize how bad the problem is before we can actually try to get a handle on fixing it.
We're talking with State Senator Robb Myers. We're talking about the size and scope of state government, and we're talking specifically about the employment numbers of who's being employed by what. We're going to continue this conversation here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show continues. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. We'll be back with more here, and Robb Myers in just a moment.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show, because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, Robb Myers is our guest. For those of you looking to see, is there a link? Rob, do you have an archive of your newsletters on the web?
If you go to my Facebook page, we always post it there, and there's a link each time to look at the full thing. So just go to State Senator Robert Myers and just scroll back, and you'll find every one of the newsletters there. Okay, all right, good. Folks can go take a look at that. I don't know why I don't have a link to view in my browser here, but I've got the article up, and this is a fascinating article. And we're basically gonna kind of scratch the surface here, because it gets down into the nitty gritty in a lot of these things. And when you start taking a look at it, it's some crazy stuff when you realize how we've fallen into this. Not only, and I know Rob's going to get into this a little bit, but not only because of just the direct jobs that we're talking about there, but I've talked about this becoming a dependency state. And so not only do we have the direct jobs of people who are working directly for government, but because we've created more of a dependency state and people have become dependent on that government spend for their own living, now it's creating an outsized effect on the economy and the pressures even more, right, Rob? Yeah, absolutely. I want to answer a question Frank had in the chat room. He was asking how much of our state budget is now coming from the feds, and you're looking at close to 60% is of the state budgets coming from the feds. You got to remember that the vast majority of that the state has to match in some way, and it could be like our road construction budget. The feds give us 90%. We have to provide 10. You get Medicaid. There's multiple matches within Medicaid. The lowest one is the 50-50. Some of it goes up higher. Let's see what there's a 50-50. There's a 60-40. Feds picking up 60. When when folks are native and they're on Medicaid, the state pays the administrative costs, but the feds pay the actual medical costs 100%, things like this. So there's a lot of match involved there. And of course, since it's Fed money, we can't play around with it. I ran across somebody a couple of months ago that said, oh, well, it's a $15 billion budget and we're short $2 billion. Oh, well, that's not too bad. And I said, no. That's once you include the federal money. When it's just the state money, it's a $6 billion budget and we're short $2 billion. So
30%. Yeah. We're short a bunch at that point. That's the pucker factor right there, when 1/3 of the budget is not there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, when we start talking about that federal money, because it's match, and a lot of that, again, goes out to, private sector contractors. Again, that's folks that are now dependent on spending, on government spending. And that's a double whammy, because if you try to cut that, now the actual money going out to the contractor not only gets cut by what you cut in the state, but also the federal match gets cut as well. And so then they really howl. And so then that's a whole nother ball of wax. That's going to be an even tougher one to tackle than the current state shortages and stuff. So,
yeah, no. And again, that's the problem, as I've said many times before, with the dependency state, is that it creates some knock-on effects of where everybody wants to keep the gravy train rolling, because that's how they've built it around their lives. And whether it's the dependency state on the welfare side or the dependency state on the corporate cronyism side, which Rob has broken out partially on this, when you're looking at things like in that green box where it says construction and utilities, those are some of the industries that are dependent on all that government spending in largesse. That's a big problem, for sure. Right. All right. Robb Myers is our guest. We're going to continue here. We're going to let him run amok here with more information, and looks like our internet is finally stabilized. So we'll see if we can keep that rolling, and we'll be back with more of the Michael Dukes Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Let's do this thing here. We're 13 seconds out. Here we go in 12 seconds. All right. Just just count backwards with me now from 5. Okay. Here we go. Oh.
Public enema number 1. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number 1, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Dukes Show.
Okay. We are continuing on with State Senator Robb Myers from the Interior. We're talking about the three-legged stool, but not the 3 legs that you would expect. Rob's dissecting one of his newsletters from the middle of the summer where he goes through this, and he just talked about the big industries, and one of those is actually government, which we just kind of went through with all the breakdown of the employment by industry and everything else. Where do we go from there, Rob?
Well, let's talk about the oil a little bit, because let's just be honest about the situation. Okay, I make my living off of the oil industry. I drive a truck. I spend the vast majority of my time going between Fairbanks and Prudhoe. I don't want to knock the oil industry, but I do want to be honest about what the situation with it is. Oil is one of those commodities, one of those pieces of an economy that are heavily capital intensive, which means you're buying a lot of material, you're spending a lot of money, but it is not labor intensive. And as technology continues to get better, it becomes even less labor intensive. How many jobs it takes to get a barrel of oil out of the ground. So we all love oil in this state. We talk all the time about trying to put more oil in the pipeline. I'm all in favor of all of that. But I do want to be honest about what that means for our employment. If you get an oil job, it's generally a very well-paid job. However, oil by itself, again, is only about 4% of our state's economy. It's 20% of our state's GDP, but it's only 4% of our state's economy because, it's not a labor-intensive industry. And so as we look to put more oil in the pipeline, we need to be honest about that situation. And that's one of the dangers that we have have fallen into over the last 50 years as we failed to diversify our economy. We've kind of stuck ourselves by being dependent on this industry that actually doesn't employ a lot of people directly. Employ some more people indirectly. You start, because those jobs are so well paid, the multiplier for the guys that live in state anyway is one of the highest out there. As to, guys, working on the slope, they support auto mechanics at home and restaurant workers and, guys over at the movie theater and things like that, or buying houses and, so they got to get the heating oil and everything else. They've got that money to spread out throughout the economy, but the actual honest to goodness direct employment by the oil industry is actually very, very low. And I think people don't often realize that. And so we're going to have to deal with that. As we're talking about wanting to grow our economy, well, we need to diversify out of oil, because if we're actually trying to employ people, there's a limited capacity for that within the oil sector.
Yeah, exactly. And because I think most people think of oil as being this huge, I think that they think that 20% of the people who are employed in the state are working for the oil industry, just based on the number of 20% for revenue. They think it's a match, but it's not. Unfortunately, again, the outsized component here of this three-legged stool is the employment from government and everything else. It competes. In fact, it actually beats out other industries in the private sector. And that is the biggest part of the problem overall. That's the next, right? That's the next leg of the stool is basically everything else.
Right. Yeah. You're looking at every other industry outside of government and oil is 45% of our economy. Now, 45% sounds like a lot, but again, that's the percent of the economy that has not grown in 20 years. That is the percent of the economy that, we have not been able to get a handle on to actually diversify out in 50 years. I like to contrast us to Texas, because another large oil state. Now, they've been drilling longer than we have. They started drilling in 1901, but even though they are a huge economy, a huge oil industry, they're actually drilling about 6 times the amount of oil that we are. The last I checked, the oil industry and their economy is only about 1/8 of their economy. And, that's much, and that's in terms of GDP, not employment, so ours is 20%, theirs is around 12, because they have been able to diversify out. Now, the thing is that in order to diversify out from a natural resource-based economy, whether we're talking about oil or mining or timber or fishing or any of those, what you have to do to diversify out is you have to get the proceeds of the resource into hands of individuals. You got to get the royalties into hands of individuals. That is what they have discovered over the years. If you get the money out of the state's hands and into individuals' hands, you end up with double the economic bang for your buck. We figured that out just by looking at some natural gas stuff a few years back and around the world. And a big part of our problem, a big part of the reason that our economy has not diversified is because the state owns the royalties. The state has the subsurface rights, and that really puts a hindrance on how much we can grow our economy, because the money, the capital that could get invested into other industries, because, let's say I owned a piece of property that somebody was drilling oil on. Well, that's great that I got oil coming in, but oil's not the business I care about. That's not what I want to do for a job. So I'm going to take that money and go start another business in something else that I care about. That's how the money gets out to diversify out and grow an actual honest to goodness, well-balanced economy. And we've got a very unbalanced economy in this. We've got this three-legged stool, but 2 of those legs are so outsized compared to the rest of them, and have been for 50 years now. But because of the way that we set up our state, because of the way that we set up our state budget, we don't get out of that. Now, the sad part about it is that we were finally getting to a place where the PFD was becoming large enough that it could actually substitute for those royalties and start to Brad likes to talk about the lower and middle income guys. Well, if you're looking at the middle and maybe the upper middle income, that don't necessarily need the PFD in order to, say, fill the freezer or fill the heating oil tank, but it's still a decent sized boost compared to what your regular paycheck looks like. That's where that money starts to become useful in terms of investing in starting a new business.
Right.
We were talking to some guys from the University of Alaska Anchorage. They're small business guys in a hearing a few years ago, and they were saying, look, a quarter of the businesses in this state can get started with 10 grand or less. This is a few years ago, so maybe up that to like 12 or 13 once we account for inflation the last few years. But 10 grand or less, you put 4 PFDs together if you follow the formula, and you'd have that. What would that do to our economy if we could start more businesses that way by taking that money and putting it out into individuals' hands instead of concentrating it all within the state? And now, how do I make a living off of that money? Oh, right. Well, I hire a lobbyist, and right. I get myself, I get my business dependent on state spending.
Well, and this is the problem again with this malinvestment. Essentially, I mean, we never see the money flow directly into the economy because it bypasses the economy and goes straight to the state coffers. Now we know, economists have talked about this for years, that the number of time a dollar turns in the economy is really important, and that a dollar in the private economy turns 6 or 7 times, where a dollar that's in the public economy that's spent by government only turns 1 time, maybe. And that's a problem. If you've got $1 billion, instead of turning that $1 billion 6 or 7 times in the economy, now it's only turned the 1 time, or maybe even less, 0.8%. That's a huge problem. And that's where we're at right now. That's why this is, I've talked for years about how that by this direct injection of money into the state's hands was a stealth tax the whole time. I mean, setting aside the PFD, setting aside the permanent fund itself, this direct stuff into government where they receive all the royalties directly is a way that they've short-circuited the whole economic development of the state, because that money never flows directly into the economy itself to then be pulled back out by the state.
Correct, because what we have to remember is that as individuals, we're going to make decisions that are on the whole, not every individual, of course, on the whole, are going to be the most economically sound decisions that we can make, given the information that we have available. The state doesn't do that. The state, by and large, is going to make decisions that are most politically sound. And I'm going to care about, not only who's say donating to my reelection. I'm going to care about who's got the best lobbyist. I'm going to care about who can organize the biggest group of people, biggest voting block. And now that we've been doing this for so long, now it's kind of, it's a snowball rolling downhill. And that goes back to what we started with, which is 45% ish of the employment in this state is based on government spending in one way, shape, or form. And that becomes a huge voting block to keep the system going, to perpetuate the system. And then we wonder, why can't we cut government? Well, because there's this huge voting block that says, if my representative votes to cut government, I'm going to vote him out and put in somebody who will vote to keep government spending and keep my paycheck going.
Right. And that's the biggest part of this whole problem, is that it's a perpetuation of the cycle. It's that kind of that self-licking ice cream, the doom loop that I've talked about before. We're into that part. And if we don't, I mean, we've now reached the end of the road, or so we think, until they try and combine the funds and then have access to the corpus. And that's a whole different debate. But I mean, we're rapidly reaching the point to where there's only so many pots of money left. And of course, that's why they're talking about the permanent fund now, because there is no other easy sources of revenue to draw from.
Right. We set up this model back in the 70s, honestly, probably kind of unintentionally. It's just, oh, hey, money showed up on our doorstep. What are we going to do with it? We didn't think about, oh, should this money be showing up on our doorstep? Would it be better for us if it didn't? Would it be better for us if it went to the private sector instead of the public? But the problem is, that we set up this system 50 years ago, and then the bottom falls out of oil in 2014, and we, some of us are asking, oh, is this a good system? Should we actually be continuing this? Most people are just saying, oh, shoot, that system is what provides my job. How do I perpetuate the system? And that goes through SBR and the CBR, and then into the PFD. And, now we're talking about combining the funds to keep the system going another 10 or 20 years, until we start eating fast enough into the seed corn or the corpus that, now that doesn't perpetuate the system anymore. So what's the next thing that we're going to go to, do we pass another constitutional amendment to go from 5% to 6% so we can continue the system another decade or so? That's a scary place to be.
The surprising part is that the way the original system was set up, if we had held to it, we'd still be doing okay. It would have been an artificial restriction on government because people would have received their full PFD. The economy would be a lot better off because they would have gotten their $1.7 billion every year in PFDs that would have gone into the economy to turn 6 or 7 or 8 times. And government would have had to find other sources of revenue or reduced itself to match that. But because we couldn't follow what the framers intended, this is what happens when you manipulate the system.
Let's phrase that a little differently. Instead of finding other sources of revenue, how about let's put it this way: the politicians would have had to be honest with the people about what it cost to keep our government going.
Yep. Yeah, they would have to be honest about the size and scope of government and said, if you want all these shiny bells and whistles and things, you're going to have to pay for it some other way. And unfortunately, they instead just went right around that and took the PFD directly, and now people have no say in what's going on. Robb Myers is our guest. We're going to continue here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We return with more. And Robb Myers, what happens to these 3 legs? Where do we go from here? Back with more right after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes,
allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, we're continuing. Robb Myers is our guest, and we are continuing that discussion with Robb. Again, it would if we had just held to the plan, we would have been fine. But unfortunately, that pot of money is just too juicy. That's where SB 26 came from, right? The POMV draw. The money was just too juicy a target for them to avoid at that point. And that's the real problem there for sure.
Yep, absolutely. It's, we've perpetuated this system, and, to answer your question a little bit, I know we'll get onto it once we get back to the radio. What are we doing from here? You got 45% in the government, 10% in the oil, and 45% in everybody else. Well, what's Juneau focused on doing? Juneau is focused on preserving that 45% of government spending and doing everything they can to keep that going, because that's their voter base, because that is, that's what they are the most connected to. Because again, Juneau is not connected to the rest of the economy. It doesn't care if the rest of the economy falls apart. And we're slowly moving to a place where it really doesn't care if the oil economy falls apart either, because a smaller and smaller portion of our state's budget is coming off of that money anyway. So it's a scary place for us to be.
Randy says, by diversification, do you mean Alaska should manufacture more things? Like what? But I don't think it's just manufacture. I mean, the diversification, again, goes back to that money and the entrepreneurship that it could create if it was in the economy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, would we manufacture a little bit more? Yeah, maybe. You kind of got 2 big things getting in the way of manufacturing in Alaska. One is energy prices, and the other is location, transportation costs, things like that. So the energy prices, if the gas line actually goes through, I know that's a whole nother that's a whole nother show. We're not going to do that right now. But, if the gas line goes through, that could potentially solve some of those issues. But you still have the transportation, the location on the globe situation. We're in an amazing spot for air transport, obviously. I mean, Anchorage is taking advantage of that. But we're not in an amazing spot for ground transportation, not that great of a spot for water transportation. And I mean, most goods in this world move by water or ground. So we still have those issues. But yeah, to Randy's point, it's not about manufacturing necessarily. It's about people, individuals making their own decisions based on the information and the opportunities they have available to them to make the most economically sound decisions that they can. And instead of doing that, we have outsourced all of this decision making to some groups in Juneau to make the most politically astute decisions that they can. And politically astute and economically astute are not going to get you the same result.
Absolutely. And that's the problem. If we could grow the private economy, there would be an avenue for them to be able to at some point tap it in one way or another if they wanted to do that, but it would give the people a say into whether or not they wanted to grow the size and scope of government. I mean, this is going back to my thought experiment that I've been talking about for years, where let's just say the state gave all the royalty money to all the people. Let's just say it was a dividend. It wasn't a dividend. It was just their share, right? It's not a dividend. It's here's your share as an owner of all the resources. And every person in the state got a check for $20,000. And then they issued a tax bill 3 weeks later or 2 weeks later that said, okay, your share of the state government is now $19,000 of that $20,000. How fast do you think the spending in the state would come to a screeching halt, right? Now, this is never going to happen, but it's the prime example of what I'm talking about.
And it's been interesting this last year, especially with Democrats in charge of both bodies for the first time in a while. It's been interesting to watch the actual revenue bills that they have been putting forward that they've actually been getting some traction on. Because, I mean, there's a couple of like income tax bills and stuff like that. But the ones that are really gaining traction and moving and gaining interest from people are the revenue bills that continue to keep the true costs of government hidden. They're the ones that don't ask people to pay for things directly. We've got that internet tax bill that the gov vetoed last month. We've got an oil, something that's trying to alter the oil tax credits. We've got the S Corp tax bill. And again, all of these bills, they are designing them in such a way that they are still keeping the true cost of government hidden from people, from the average Alaskan, because they know that the moment that the average Alaskan actually has to pony up and pay it, they're going to start paying attention to government spending and start asking for less spending instead of more. And they are deathly afraid of that.
Robb Myers is our guest. We're going to continue here. Jumping back in, the Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Hey, they're already with us down south. Hi, guys.
The Michael Duke Show, proudly splitting the left versus right dichotomy. Yeah, I had to look that word up, too. I don't think it means what he thinks it means. Here he is, though. That guy, Michael Dukes, the one with the show.
Okay. I let the Peninsula jump into the behind the scenes there for a minute before we got done. Some interesting discussions there. All right, Rob, down to the last segment here. So we've got a 3-legged stool, and we got a really, really beefy leg in the government spend, the government employment, things like that. We've got a fairly beefy leg in the oil industry and all its add-ons and everything else. And then we've got kind of this anemic leg. I mean, it's by size, it's not that anemic, but by power and by revenue, it's pretty small. And so we've got this 3-legged stool, and you saying this is setting us up for some real problems, a big fall potentially.
Right. Because if if again, you got 45% getting their money from the government in some way, shape, or form. That's federal, state, and local. 10% that's oil, give or take, and 45% that's everybody else. Well, here's the problem. Juneau doesn't care about the everybody else sector. They don't get their money from that. That isn't their voter base. And so that's not who they're paying attention to. What they're paying attention to some extent is the oil industry, because they still get a fair amount of money off of that, although that is shrinking, partly as a result of prices and other stuff, partly as a result of just taking more of the PFD, and hence they're caring more about that. They've got their own independent revenue stream now coming off of the permanent fund. So the three sectors of the economy in that way, the one that they care about is that 45% that is funded by government, either directly or indirectly, because that's their voter base. That's what they're trying to preserve. And that's what they're trying to maintain funding for. That's why they're taking the permanent fund dividend. That's why they're trying to combine the accounts, because I'm going to go into this in a piece that I'm trying to write right now. But I think that one of the reasons that we are seeing the permanent fund managed the way that it's being managed is because, yeah, they could theoretically manage it better and have more money, but they are deathly afraid of potentially having a drop in the stock market or what have you. And then all of a sudden, now I have to cut back on that 45% of government funded jobs, because it's one thing for people to come down to Juneau and say, hey, we'd like X to be funded. And we go, sorry, guys, we don't have the money for it. It's a whole nother thing to say, hey, here's something that we've been funding for 20 or 30 years, and we have to cut back on it. And it's interesting to watch the things that they do cut back on. Just looking at the budget this last year that got passed, because we were in a pretty bad budget hole. The PFD got cut further and stuff. But it's interesting to watch what else they cut too. They didn't necessarily cut a whole lot of jobs. They cut a few. They didn't cut a whole lot though. And they still tried to keep things going, like the federal match for the road money and things like that. But what they did start saying is they said, okay, let's start cutting the things that don't necessarily affect jobs directly. So one of the things that we cut, school bond debt reimbursement. That doesn't really cut any jobs directly, but you know what that does do? That's going to increase everybody's property taxes for those of us that are in boroughs that have some of that debt. We cut back on the state equipment fleet, deferred maintenance. So sorry.
Triggered.
So, every year we turn over a little bit of the state's equipment fleet for DOT, the road plows and the dump trucks that we use for patching potholes and stuff like that. You turn over a little bit of that equipment fleet every year. And so we put a piece in the budget that says it's our intent that the state does not buy any new equipment this next year. And it's like, well, okay, you can do that for a year or two, and then eventually it comes back to bite you in the butt. It's a lot of these like little funding things, what is part of the tricks that we use to balance the budget this year, which is like, again, you can do some of those for a year or two, and then eventually the problem gets worse. So, but again, they pulled a lot of tricks that don't impact those jobs, that don't impact their voter base. They're trying to maintain that voter base and those 45% of jobs funded by government.
4 minutes left here, Rob. So what's the solution in your mind? Walk us through the solution in your mind here as to what this looks like.
The solution in my mind is, eventually it's going to happen eventually anyway. You and I both know this. We've both talked about it. Is eventually the state is going to have to be honest with the people of this state about what it takes to run this government. And the question is, do we do that now? Or do we do that in 20 or 30 years after we've run the rest of the private economy into the ground, that 10% of oil and the 45% of everybody else? Once those guys, once another half or 2/3 of those guys have been chased out of the state, is that then when we're finally honest about what the cost of our government is and what kind of a government we should be supporting given our population base? There was an economist in in ICER in Anchorage that I like to look at his writings. He came out with a paper about 10 years ago that said, because of all of the money that the state has been able to distribute throughout the economy since the 70s, we're actually supporting around 100,000 people that we otherwise would not be able to support because the state is passing out that money. And again, some of that's in like welfare type programs, but most of it, again, is going to be in jobs that the state is supporting through state spending. So are we going to finally get to the point where that doesn't work anymore because, we're spending faster than the permanent fund is returning? We've chased the oil industry out. We don't care about the rest of the economy. And so that's already gone.
Right.
Now we really don't have anything else to tap. And, when we finally do hit rock bottom. Oh, and of course, then there's the other piece, which is, as I saw this analysis from somebody probably about 3-4 years ago. So I don't know what the numbers have probably changed some, but there's the rest of the little pots of money that the state has. We tapped the higher education fund this year. There's PCE. There's you've got ADA's got its fund. AHFC's got its fund. You start pushing all of those funds together. That's somewhere in the neighborhood of $16 to $18 billion as well. We're going to start probably tapping into some more of those over the years as we're trying to patch holes in the budget, because we're spending faster than the permanent fund is bringing money in. We're spending faster than the oil industry is bringing money in. And we're scaring away every other industry. Right. So, that we have to be honest with ourselves about what it costs to run this government. We have to be honest and transparent with what kind of government can we afford. And because of the way that we are funding our government through the permanent fund and to some extent through the oil industry, we're doing everything that we can to make sure that we keep those costs hidden until those costs actually become transparent to the average Alaskan. We're just going to keep going down this road until we hit rock bottom and the permanent fund is gone.
Well, and I think that leads inevitably to the question of, taxes are inevitable, right? If we keep going the way we're going, a tax of some form on the state beyond the stealth tax of the PFD is inevitable. And I'm right? You're agreeing with that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, taxes are inevitable. It's just a question of when we implement them and what form we implement them at that time. But no, they're going to happen.
State Senator Robb Myers, our guest. Thank you so much for coming on board. You can subscribe to his newsletter, go to his Facebook page and find it, Senator Robb Myers on Facebook. Thank you so much for coming on board. Folks, tomorrow, Brad Keithley and Chris Story. We'll see you then. Well, and then we had that thing about talking about hitting rock bottom. I always had the hope in the back of my mind that, boy, if we hit rock bottom, at least we'd have the permanent fund to help us build back better, hopefully. But Brad made the comment last week and pointed out that, if they get their way, rock bottom is now further away because they'll just draw on the permanent fund. And then when they draw that down to almost nothing, then we'll hit rock bottom with no backup. And that's the problem. It's the old saying of, Lord, please give me something that I can fight today, or a revolution that I can fight today so that my children don't have to deal with it. That's what we're doing. We're kicking this can down the road to our children at that point. Rob, final thoughts here.
So I was reading this book years ago, and it was a medical book. It was talking about weird medical things. Very fascinating, but it had this piece in the introduction that I think can be applied in a lot of places. It said, when do you intentionally do things that you know will kill you in 40 years? What can keep you alive next week? And I think that's really the mindset. A lot of what is going on right now is people are saying, all right, we've been on this path for 50 years. It is going to be extremely painful to change it. So I just want to keep it going for another year or 2 or 5. I know that in 20 or 30 or 40 years, this path is unsustainable. But you know what? I will be out of state or dead, or my kids will be out of state by the time we hit that point. So I'm just going to ride this gravy train as long as I can.
Right.
And when I get to the end of the track, I'm going to, steal from something else to make some new track to keep it going another 5 years. And, that's a large part of the reason why it is so important for us to be paying attention to combining the permanent fund accounts, because again, they're just trying to push that track a little bit further out into the gorge, where that bridge is gone. So instead of, going off at the edge of the gorge, now we're going off the track in the middle of the gorge. Now,
yeah, no, I'm going to leave this. I'm going to leave this for somebody else. Is essentially, I'm going to do what I can do, and then this will be somebody else's problem. If I can push it out another 5 years, another 10 years, it'll be somebody else's problem, and I won't be. It's like I've been saying, it's the game of musical chairs, where there's only one chair left, and pretty soon it's going to be everybody's gone except for the one guy who just got elected, and he's going to be like, gulp. What do I do? Right. And that's the problem, is that all these people are like, well, if I can get it going they're just building more road to kick the can down. That's all they're doing right now. The bill is eventually going to come due. Final thoughts here.
Well, I mean, to continue your analogy of musical chairs, we're kind of getting to the point where the musicians are starting to pass out effectively. We've been we've been tapping each of those musicians, and now and for so long that they're starting to pass out. And so now we're trying to prop up the musicians, and it's like, well, we can see where this is headed. We know where this is going. We can't tell you when it's going to fall apart, but we can tell you that it will fall apart. But this is the direction that we're going. And until we're honest about the situation, and again, do we want to be in a place where we hit rock bottom when the permanent fund is at 65 billion, because that's when the earnings reserve account is run out? Or do we want to hit rock bottom when the permanent fund is at zero, because we tapped the whole darn thing because we got access to the corpus?
Right. And we've got nothing left to rebuild with. We've got no seed corn and nothing left to plant. The farm is bare, and we have no seed corn because we've eaten every bit of it. All right. Well, Robb Myers, thank you so much, my friend. Appreciate your writing here on this. This is I really want to know, what are your fellow they got to look you in the eye. They got to know that this is coming. And how do you look yourself in the mirror and sleep at night knowing that this is coming? And you're just exacerbating it. Go ahead.
Again, everybody is looking at their voter base.
Yeah.
If their voter base is based on government spending, they say one answer. If their voter base is based on the rest of the private sector, there's another answer. But which one of those is larger, and which one makes it to the polls more often?
It's a great question. Robb Myers, our guest. Thank you so much, my friend. We appreciate you coming on board. We'll talk to you again soon.
Good to see you, Michael. Catch you later.
All right, folks. We're out of time for today. We will see you tomorrow. Be kind, love one another, live well. We'll see you then.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.